It's time to hear from our last speaker of the Emerald Summit. Let's give it up for Alba Forns. Alba is the COO and co-founder of Climatize, a platform connecting investors with bankable climate infrastructure projects. Her goal and mission in life is to fight for climate justice and inclusion, and firmly believes the whole society must be brought along in the pivot to a net zero future. Today, Alba will be giving a closing keynote on the topic of impact investing, how you can make a difference with your financial choices.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Can someone confirm?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. That's great. I will go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Perfect. So you should be able to see my screen at this point. Can you also confirm that?
Looks great.
Perfect. Great. Then, hi all. My name is Alba Forns. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. I am the co-founder and the COO of Climatize. Climatize is a platform that's connecting investors with bankable climate infrastructure projects with a focus on community solar. I know this is the last keynote speech, so I assume you're all low on energy already, but well, I hope that you enjoyed the other presentations. I will try to keep it brief, so we have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. But if you have anything that you want to add, just drop it in the chat and I will make sure to answer you. So the topic for today, or what I'm going to be covering with you, is Impact Investing 101. So how to make a difference with your financial choices. During today's session, we're going to be talking about sustainable finance, ESG, impact investing, and then last but not least, how to actually make a difference with your financial choices. So before we get started, how many of you care about the planet? Okay, I cannot see you guys, but I assume that if you are in this presentation, okay, I can see some thumbs up here. I assume that if you're attending this summit is because you do care about the environment, right? So I hate to break it to you, but your money is actually fueling the climate crisis. Anytime you leave your cash sitting in a bank account, the bank holding it for you is putting it to work by lending it to various organizations, generally including fossil fuels. You might have known this already and taken action, and if you have done so, that's great. But the overall lack of public awareness around banks financing fossil fuels is pretty scary. Despite the risks that the climate crisis is posing, funding for fossil fuels has actually increased annually. So an example would be that fossil fuel financing has totaled 742 billion in 2021, just from the world's 60 largest banks alone. After this presentation, I really encourage you to do some research and identify some sustainable banking alternatives. And if you want some resources for that, happy to provide them as well after the presentation. So before we jump in and talk about sustainable finance, I would like to cover the origins of it as well. So, back in the 15th century, the first banks in Italy were heavily influenced by religion and morals. But then during the Industrial Revolution, they started to have a more international scope and to pursue profit. Multinational banks experimented a period of growth until people realized they had been supporting environmental destruction. And as a result of that, in the 1980s, banks were forced to do environmental risk screening by the EU, which kind of led to sustainable finance and to what that is today. Nowadays, ESG is a level of sustainable finance and it has gone mainstream. So I assume most of you have heard that term before. The concept was developed early this century by the United Nations, and their goal was to protect investments from financial risks coming from climate change, human rights, work disputes, or poor corporate governance. Since 2019, there has been a fivefold growth of ESG internet searches, and over 90% of S&P 500 companies now publish ESG reports. If we look at the investment inflows in sustainable finance funds, we've seen that actually increased from 5 billion in 2018 to 70 billion in 2021. So, what does ESG actually mean? There are different levels of sustainable finance, and ESG is just one of them. ESG actually stands for environmental, social, and governance, meaning that people and planet are put at the forefront when taken into consideration when making investment decisions. So I included here on this slide a breakdown of what the European Commission is considering under the environmental, social, and the governance standards. So when we talk about the environmental considerations, we are including the preservation of biodiversity, pollution prevention, circular economy, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Under the social considerations, we generally refer to diversity, equity and inclusion, labor relations, investment in human capital and communities, and also human rights. And then last but not least, when we talk about governance, it really ranges from management structures, employee relations, and executive remuneration. This looks great on paper, but a study by Influence Map shows that 71% of the funds studied failed to test when determined if they were actually aligned with the Paris Agreement's global targets. And additionally, many claim that the principles around which ESG indexes are based need to be better thought through. So these are the indexes and how they are based on that. And basically, we have three main buckets. So we can categorize these investments via exclusionary, single theme, or best in class principles. When we talk about exclusionary, the decision is basically to exclude controversial themes. An example could be weapons. Single theme is basically when we are focusing on a topic such as empowering women in the industry or renewable energy. And tech companies, for instance, are normally very strong from an environmental standpoint. So they would be hitting that target. But then if we look at if they comply with social and governance standards, they might not. So that's why single theme can be complicated in some cases. And then the last one is best in class, which just means being better than the rest of your competitors. This does not necessarily mean that you comply with the standards. It just means that you're better than the rest. So it's not very reliable either. Not only are the foundations pretty questionable, but there are also asks about the quality and the standardization of the rankings and ESG rankings. So you're also aware are the services which examine companies and they provide numerical ratings for their sustainability performance. So when looking at ESG investing and financial performance, an examination of 1,000 studies found a positive relationship that became more pronounced over time. There's also evidence suggesting low-risk ESG funds are more resilient in periods of uncertainty. And a great example of that would be the first year of the pandemic, where ESG funds outperformed the S&P 500. So in short, ESG is basically consisting in using data to identify risks that might negatively impact investment performance. There are practices under sustainable finance, such as impact investing, which is taking this one step further. Impact investing is made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside with financial return instead of just focusing on mitigating risks that are coming from environmental, social, or governance practices, which is ESG. A characteristic of impact investing is the broad range of investor return expectations. And here we have an example, for instance, where we can see that a study that was performed by the University of California found that the median internal rate of return for impact funds is 6.4%, while for traditional funds it's 7.4%. This has increased, though, now with the surge of interest rates as well. And then other characteristics about impact investing is that a survey that was conducted by the Global Impact Investing Network has shown that more than 88% of impact investors reported that their investment expectations met or were exceeded. Given the controversy around the integrity of ESG and impact investments, together with the lack of a framework and standardization, is making it hard to claim that they actually contribute to a better world. In my opinion, this is still a big step towards the right direction, and we should see the surge of ESG and impact investing as an opportunity and demand more integrity, transparency, regulation, and standardization to ensure that these investments are in fact sustainable. This is pretty much what I wanted to cover today about ESG and impact investing, and I'm happy to provide some sources after this presentation. But before ending, I would also like to share with you my personal story. So the reason why I became interested in impact investing in the first place and why I decided to start a company that is focused on climate justice and financial inclusion. The story of Climatize starts in Barcelona in 2019, when my co-founder and I saw 100,000 people protesting for climate action. We realized that we would all go home and nothing would be different. We asked ourselves, what is something that everyone from that crowd could contribute? And we came up with the idea that almost everyone has a little bit of spare change. This is Climatize. So we're providing the most transparent way to invest directly in climate projects. There's no greenwashing. You're putting your money straight towards funding projects. So if you were to download the app today, you could select a project that you want to invest in. You can start from as little as $5, and you can potentially earn between 8 and 12% annually, depending on the project. For the developers, they can raise capital from the growing climate movement at half the rate of banks. And we've done that via cross-collateralization of projects at a scale banks are unable to service due to their transaction costs. This is more or less where we stand as a company. So we got our regulatory approval back in April of this year. We launched in May, and so far we've fully funded 3 projects. The first project was a community solar project supporting low-income families. The second one was a solar project for a congregation. The third one was supporting a Shakespeare theater to go solar. And we just launched yesterday a project which is supporting rural communities in America. So far we raised 1 million in the first 90 days since launch. And now we are on track to reach 1.5 million in the next months. So this is everything I wanted to cover. Please let me know if you have any questions about ESG, impact investing, or the company. And as I mentioned before, if you need any sources, happy to provide them as well after the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Alba. So we actually have a question from the audience, and they are wondering if it is true that climate projects take a long time to get returns. How do you convince your customers to invest?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm sorry if you asked during the presentation. I just couldn't see my screen while I was sharing. It really depends on when you make that investment, right? So just to give you an example, with our projects, the first 3 are a 5-year term investment. The second one is 2-year term, but we actually expect to be able to provide repayments in 6 to 9 months. And that meaning that you would essentially get your principal back plus interest in less than a year. So when we're looking at project finance, there's 3 main stages. There's the development stage, the construction one, and then the operational phase. So we don't enter into the operational phase. That means that the project has already been built. But if you would invest in that phase, you might be having your money locked in for like 15 to 20 years, because that's what normally matches the PPA. If you invest in development and construction, that's significantly shorter. there is more risk. And then what we have also been providing is bridge loans in between the construction and the operational phase, which is also shorter. So just to answer your question in short, it really depends on the project stage that you enter at. And because project finance tends to come in different phases, it might be that you can just be invested for one or two of those phases instead of the entire project.
So we have another question, and they are wondering, how do you validate the right projects to invest in? Is it business specific profits or community specific impact, or balance both?
Sure, this is a great question. So what we basically do is we source the project and we enter into the diligence phase. And during the diligence phase, we basically look into the track record of the company, what other successful projects they've done in the past, make sure all of the contracts and permits are in place. We do a technical diligence where we ensure that the designs from the engineers are accurate and correct. We also look into the financial expectations. We look into the project pro forma. So basically, it's a pretty comprehensive project process. And after all of that, we provide a document that's called Form C, which is publicly available for everyone who is potentially interested in making an investment, so they can carry their own diligence as well. When it comes to what do we focus on, if it's profits, community impact, or climate impact, I would say it's the three of them. It's the combination, right? So all of these projects definitely have a climate impact since you're investing in renewable energy, which is offsetting carbon emissions. The majority of them have a social impact as well, since the projects are small and many of them support frontline communities like low and middle income tenants. And then when it comes to the profit side of things, we always encourage project developers to provide competitive returns as long as their margins are able to support that. So it's a combination of the three, and all of the information is provided to the investors, so they ultimately can make their choice. And also very important, like it's important that they are aware of the risks of investing as well. So I do encourage everyone to make their own research.
What's one piece of advice you have for people who are just starting out with impact investing?
I would say just start doing your homework. I think it is a little hard to get into investing. And then when it comes to impact investing, you also need to start taking into consideration the metrics of like how this project is good, for example, for the planet, for the people. So just do a little bit of research and understand what you're getting yourself into. And then whenever you find an opportunity that you want to participate in, evaluate the risks of that opportunity, and maybe just start with little amounts of money. So instead of going all in with a substantial amount, maybe just start with $5. Start with, I don't know, 20, something small, so that you can see how you feel about it, gain some confidence, and then once you understand the space a little bit more, maybe increment that amount.
So someone else is wondering how you track and measure your level of impact. Do you have any tools or programs that you use?
We normally do it on a project basis, and these are calculations that are provided by the project developers. So basically, by knowing how much the project is going to be producing on an annual basis, then they calculate using the EPA calculator how much that is in terms of like carbon avoided. So it is on a project by project basis. And then as a company, we do calculate our emissions annually and offset those as well.
Do you spend time on site to ensure that projects' KPIs are met? How do you scale your team in this case?
Sure, that's a great question. We do not go to the sites only if required, but the projects do share all of their production data. So in our case, the three first projects that we provided the opportunity of investment in had already been built. So the project was already there. It's a bridge loan in between the construction and the operational phase, which enables the project developer to repay the prior investors and then move into the operational phase, which is the 15, I would say, year investment opportunity. And given that, they can provide the production data, make sure that it's hitting the target, and this way we can continue to monitor that the project is operating as it should. If there is a problem, we can always go to the site and check, but generally it is not required. Sure. I also saw another question on the chat about the company's carbon offsetting processes and how we have achieved that. To be honest, we are a very small company. So right now, the majority of our emissions are are related with maybe, like our using our computers, and we don't even have an office. We go to a co-working space. So what we do is annually we calculate what those emissions are, and then we offset it. We're using a platform that's called Leaders for Climate Action, and we basically use that platform to both calculate what our emissions are, and then we offset it via them as well. Also happy to connect you if any of you want to check that out.
All right, so if there are no more questions, Alba, is there anything else you would like to add?
Not from my end. So, well, if anyone has any other questions that you didn't ask during this presentation, feel free to reach out to me. And it's been a pleasure to be here with you all. I hope that the summit went well.